You can never give up on your purpose, and that never needs to be identified with a company. There's got to be a way that purpose is not identified with an outside worth. The purpose is identified by who you can be on the planet and fulfilling your own personal requirement around that. Because it's a personal requirement that we're satisfying. It's not even an external requirement. It's a personal motive inside oneself to know that you feel that you've given a value. That is incredibly personal. It's a very self-reflective journey and a very different journey for everybody in particular.
I am Christina Suter, and this is the Real Estate Breakthrough Show, where we talk about the reality of real estate, the mindset you need in order to face the reality of what it is, and tips and tricks to get you moving forward in investing. I am your host, Christina Suter.
Hey you, this is Christina Suter with Real Estate Breakthrough, and I have Russell Gray with me, and I feel privileged. I feel privileged because I consider Russell to be a mentor, an unofficial mentor, and hopefully soon official mentor in my life. He is a man who has not only an incredible amount of experience in real estate, but I made the mistake or the gift of saying purpose and being on purpose in one's life to Russell when I took one of his classes, and we riffed on that for a good 5 to 6 minutes on our mutual passion about that. And so that to me speaks to my heart. You, my listeners, know that what I care about is, are you living a life that is fulfilled? What does it mean to use use real estate to break through to your financial freedom? And what is financial freedom about? Because it's not about money. It's about something a lot deeper and a lot more important than just cash. So Russell, thank you so much for being here on my podcast. And why don't you give people a quick understanding of your background? I've tried to highlight it a little bit, but I think you know it better than I can ever speak it.
Well, I'm an older guy, so I have a long background. But at this stage of my life, I really consider myself a lifelong Main Street capitalist. I started out getting out of high school and married my high school sweetheart. I didn't really want to go to college. I didn't have the patience. My dad had started a high-tech company and he didn't go to college. And so I wasn't convinced I needed to. Even back then, I think today younger people are really questioning whether that's a good use of their time. So I ended up going to work, and I started my first business when I was just barely 19, bought my first piece of real estate when I was just barely 19. I discovered a lot of things in that journey. My uncle, my dad's younger brother, took me under his wing and took me out in the real world and taught me how to put on a suit and tie a tie and present myself to the marketplace at 18, 19 years old. So I learned to sell in the streets of LA. Not by a classroom or an audio course, but just by going out and watching people who were actually playing the game in real life win. He suggested to me when I was renting an apartment in Huntington Beach that it would be a good idea to stop throwing my money away on rent and buy a piece of real estate. I had no idea what to do or how to do that, but it was my first no money down transaction. We borrowed the down payment and we signed a few papers. To this day, I don't remember the terms, the interest rate. I remember nothing. But I know that equity happened, and in both the property and the business. And so I experienced that. I experienced mentorship. I learned the value of sales, and I got all those lessons before I was 20 years old. So just before my 21st birthday, I sold out of the business. I sold out of the property. And I had some maturing to do, and so I was a bit of a train wreck, but I had a little bit of money, and I moved back from Southern California to Northern California, and I went into corporate sales, and I did that for a few years while I got myself together. And then my late wife and I we started raising children, and that became the focus. A little bit into that, I started making some money, and all of a sudden I became very interested in how to mitigate taxes, which led me into understanding or studying the financial system. What are taxes? Where do they come from? And I knew there were financial strategies out there that people knew that I didn't know. So I became an avid reader of books and attending seminars way before the internet. There was no way to do research except to go to the library. I would go to the law library in Santa Clara County. I would try to understand how all that stuff worked. And because we were homeschooling our children in the 80s, before it was even a thing, my late wife tasked me with teaching economics, civics, and US history. And that and my business experience and my aversion to paying tax really took me down a rabbit hole. And I went through a couple of different iterations. I won't bore you with all the details, but I came out of that in about 1995 with this conviction that our financial system, if it wasn't overtly corrupt, it was certainly, perhaps even irreparably dysfunctional. And I ended up at a seminar in San Jose, California, and I heard a guy from Montana talk about what I've come to call the monopolies, which is the monopoly of government, the monopolies of big business. And I began to see that the normal divide between left and right, Democrat, Republican, conservative, and liberal weren't really the divides. The divides were really between the little guy and the monopolists. And I began to look back in history at monopolies. And John D. Rockefeller was probably the king of monopolies. And if you really study him and study his business life and the way he thought, brilliant man, but borderline sociopathic, in my opinion, in terms of his ruthlessness in dominating the market. And I think a lot of good things came out of that, but there's some really bad things that came out of that. And so in the late 1990s, I wrote a business plan to create a financial education company that was more based on a consumer's reports type thing, where they weren't motivated by advertising. I'd read Money Magazine, and they would always pump mutual funds, and on the opposite page would be a full page ad for Fidelity or Vanguard I mean, the conflict of interest was so obvious, even to me. And I felt like there was a better way. And so I went out and tried to raise some investment capital in Silicon Valley to do that. This is like at the peak of the dot-com thing. And what I realized in both watching my dad, who was a high-tech entrepreneur who had raised money for a high-tech business, semiconductor company, and seeing how his VCs had board seats and influenced his business decisions. And ultimately, as they got close to going public, they became very myopic. They didn't really care about the mission of the company. They really didn't care about the customers or the marketplace. They just cared about optimizing that bottom line to get the maximum valuation. Well, ironically, he went public in 1987 in June, and he was in his lockout period before October 19th. October 19th came, completely wiped him out. I'm 27 years old, and I'm in the securities business at the time, looking at that, going, how is it that a guy brilliant enough to start a company, take it public, raise millions of dollars, gets completely wiped out in one day by something he didn't even see coming? And how did all these people around him? So that
amazing. I have to highlight that. That's an amazing question, because I know most people have, if you've been involved in real estate or in securities long enough through a full cycle, if not two cycles, then that question resides in the back of your head. How is it possible that the best and the brightest, the people we look up to, can still get nailed late in their careers? And I have several examples in the back of my head, including my own example, including your example, right? The lives we have lived that have gotten us nailed. And that's part of why the bravery of you need to be brave and have this grit, determination, investing in real estate. So if you have an insight into that answer, please give us that insight, because we all, as professional investors, carry that question.
Yeah, well, there's two parts to it. One is you have to understand that your business or your investment or your portfolio doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in an ecosystem. And the ecosystem isn't static. It's very, very fluid. So the way I liken it, my little illustration, in fact, I have a graphic for it, is it's a ship floating on an ocean. And so you have an ecosystem under the water, much of which you can't see. There's currents and there's creatures and there's things going on. And then above the water line, you have what you really focus your time on, which is your ship, your environment, the thing that you are responsible for maintaining. But you're being blown around by weather, and there's weather formations that you can see, but there's things over the horizon you can't see. And so when you begin to understand that dynamic, you realize how important it is to have good data, to know how to read the stars, to be able to know how to read the winds, to be up on that perch and look out at the horizon, see further down the food chain. that you're probably not going to have enough experience or expertise on your own to be able to see all that, which is why it's so important to be part of groups where other people are bringing in different perspectives, listening to a lot of different points of view, not residing in an echo chamber. So all of those things are very, very important. And for me, in 2006, 2007, I was a bit of a real estate guru. We had the book, we had the TV show, the radio show, seminars, the mentoring club. We had so much going on. And we had people who were more experienced than us that saw the bigger picture, like my friend Robert Kiyosaki, guys like Kenny McElroy. And they were trying to warn us, but we couldn't hear them. I couldn't hear them because I lived in an echo chamber, and everywhere we went, everybody was, all real estate all the time. There's some of that going on right now. But after 2008, what happened, and this is the other side of the equation. So you got to be able to see the big picture and really understand that what happens in what I call the macro sphere rolls downhill onto Main Street. If you don't think it matters what China decides to do with its bond portfolio or Japan, you don't understand how that directly affects the mortgage rate you're going to pay, right? If you don't understand that, or like these tariff policies, how does all that roll downhill? And then the other part is that a lot of the talking heads, the financial system, they're all designed to entice you into the buy low, sell high casinos of Wall Street. They're not really designed to talk to you about Main Street or what I call real asset investing. They don't talk about cash flow. They don't talk about counterparty risk. They don't talk about the things that we need to be thinking about because they're just playing a very, very different game, and their agenda is very different. So, but the other part of it is what happens when you suffer that kind of a loss. For my father, so much of his self-worth was wrapped up and conflated with his net worth that when he lost everything, he lost himself. And I feel very fortunate, unfortunately, at his expense to have observed that. Again, as I said, 27 years old, he was 47 years old, and he got wiped out. And he never, ever really bounced back. And I remember watching that go on for a few years and finally started taking him to these seminars. He'd never been exposed to personal development. He'd never been exposed to, these seminars where you get these ideas about how to overcome and be a better you. And of course, practical, tactical stuff too. And it helped him, but he just really struggled. And I kept telling him, Dad, if you could go back in time, now you're 50 something years old, and talk to yourself when you were 39, 40 years old, getting ready to leave your corporate job and launch your semiconductor company. Do you think that in a weekend of time with you, talking to yourself, that you would be able to deliver at least $1,500 worth of value? And he said, absolutely. I said, okay, well, this valley is full of people that want to do what you've done, and so few people have. All you have to do is put yourself in a room with 10 of those people every weekend, and you're basically working 2 days a week and making, $15,000 a week, sharing just from your experience. And I tried to convince him to become a mentor, but he just couldn't do it. And so I ended up doing it. I leveraged his experience, and he coached me, and I coached others, and I taught people what he taught me. And he was more experienced, but I was more bold. And then eventually, when I lost everything in 2008, I had to sit down and say, okay, now it's time to eat, practice what you preach, eat your own cooking, whatever you call it. And I had to say, okay, even though I just lost everything, I'm actually smarter. Now, with that said, I obviously had a huge blind spot, or multiple blind spots. So who didn't I know? What didn't I know? What did I hear that I didn't pay attention to? Why didn't I pay attention? And knowing what I know now, if I could go back, talk to myself 5-10 years ago, what would I do differently? And that became the new version of me post 2008. And it completely changed me. I went from being, kind of the mortgage guy, the financial strategist, to really kind of being the macro guy. And then when I started looking and saw what happened with the Jobs Act in 2012, as we were just kind of recovering, I saw that the ability for Main Street now to compete directly with Wall Street, because as private purveyors of private placements, we could advertise for accredited investors. I wrote a report called New Law Breaks Wall Street's Monopoly. And we took our business into the business of mentoring and coaching people to do what we had done, which is raise money and to syndicate deals. And we were very much on the front end of what's now become a big movement. But I think that Robert and I were really the pioneers of that, and it all grew out. It all grew out of the bad things that happened. So if anybody out there has gone through a really difficult time, and of course after that my wife got sick and later died 5 years later, so I have that experience as well. But when you go through that stuff, you learn that you're actually a better person, a smarter person, and you have to glean the lessons and stop beating yourself up. And then the other thing is you have to also enhance your network. I think really put yourself in a room where you're around the right people. So I put a lot more emphasis in both creating and joining those rooms, even though I'm a mentor myself and I coach people in things I feel very qualified to do, and I never coach in anything I don't. On the flip side of it, I also surround myself with people who are even in some cases 30 years younger than me, but absolutely brilliant in a space where I need help. And it's actually been fun. It keeps me young, and I've been really enjoying it.
And you're actually at there's a couple open loops here, but let's jump on to another possibility, which is you're also in the process of re-envisioning yourself at this moment. You're creating another new Russell Gray. And I think our conversation that happened at Win Funds and Influence People, the course that I took last year, and we talked about being able to write a book based on purpose. Because as you talk about, as you mature and you get older, you start to understand that the purpose isn't about the winning of people or the winning of money, quote unquote, the creation of the company. My mom sold her company, similar story, and I'll keep it super short, but my mom sold her company shortly after my stepdad died, her third husband. And he was he was an amazing human being, just like an amazing being on the planet. And I was lucky to have that influence in my life, even though it was later. And then when she had heart trouble in '80s, and when she was 68, and we all were going, "Hey mom, just get heart surgery." And she's like, "No, you don't understand. I have no reason to continue to stay alive." She had so lost her sense of purpose and direction from selling her company that she no longer felt that she had a reason to continue to stay alive. She kept trying to generate a reason, and observing that from the outside. She did pass away 4 years later from a heart attack. She wanted to be done. I get it. She wanted to be done. It was a tough life. I get it. There's all kinds of stories about her childhood and raising us kids and being a single mom and all the things that she went through. But what I took from it was you can never give up on your purpose, and that never needs to be identified with a company. It never needs to be identified with, there's got to be a way that purpose is not identified with an outside worth. The purpose is identified by who you can be on the planet and fulfilling your own personal requirement around that. Because it's a personal requirement that we're satisfying. It's not even an external requirement. It's a personal motive inside oneself to know that you feel that you've given a value. And that is incredibly personal. It's a very self-reflective journey, and a very different journey for everybody in particular. What does that mean to fulfill what your purpose is, and that it's motivated by the internals of you? And to have you jump on that, to me, spoke of your depth of experience in having the external ego things, having the external values, having the external rewards fall on their head. Because that's literally what we're left with when they fall on our head is, okay, so now who the heck am I? Because I'm not that, because clearly I'm not that, because that disappeared, right? And now you create this version of you again. And it to me, it sounds like it's still really anchored in Wall Street versus Main Street, which to me is almost a repetition of what does it mean to fulfill your purpose on the planet, not Wall Street's purpose on the planet? And how do you get the right and the efficacy to be able to do that?
Well, I have a lot to say on the topic because I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. I raised a bunch of children, and I wanted them not to just be self-indulgent consumers, quasi-sociopaths out there just trying to get as much of what they could get out of the world and leave a bunch of damage in their wake. And the reason I had energy on that is because that's how I started my life. And I did a lot of damage because I just was a very selfish person. And I was clever in my selfishness. So I was fairly successful at being selfish. And I decided through a spiritual transformation early in my 20s that wasn't who I wanted to be. And that's when I really started to understand the concept of being. And so as I went through and realized that one of the most fundamental things a human being must do is begin to examine their identity. If they're fortunate, they're raised into a healthy family who imprints upon them a fairly healthy identity. And then they're able to operate from that basis of health and strength and go do things. And then what happens often is that people aren't tested. And then when the big test of life comes, whether you lose everything financially or you lose a loved one or lose a job or you get some type of a permanent disability, you thought I was going to be active and now I'm wheelchair bound. I have a friend who was a young man and was out healthy and one day jumped off of a rock or a diving board into some water, broke his neck, and now he's a paraplegic, right? You just never know. And then you step back and for a minute, like, okay, I thought I was this person. I thought this was my life. And now it's completely not what I scripted. I feel very fortunate that I have gone through it on many occasions. And so I developed some philosophies coming through that. And I also developed some protocols for dealing with it when it happens. And so I feel like of all the things that I've had in my life, where I feel like out of my real life experience, I could offer some value to another human being, this is clearly one of them. So I have on my project list to write a book called The Purpose Formula. And the concept of the Purpose Formula is to take somebody through a process of answering a series of questions and responding to circumstances in their life to glean what their purpose might be. Because it seems to be a very difficult question. You walk up to someone and say, what's my purpose? I'm going to two-step it. They don't tell you they're going to two-step it, but that's what they're going to do. I'm just going to pick whatever I can find to do that I'm good at, that I can make money at. And then once I make enough money, I will be free. And then I'll figure out what I really want to do. For some people who aren't successful enough to be able to ever become that level of free, the clock runs out. And after maybe a series of crises along the way, midlife crisis, career crises, dissatisfactions, frustrations, whatever, if they keep their mental and physical health and gut all the way through, they end up at 65, 70 years old. And finally, they've got enough where they can have a modest retirement. And they still don't have a clue about who they are or why they're here or what they want to do. And I just think that's tragic. So to me, when I got into the business of teaching people to be financially free, I was much more interested in the freedom component than the financial component. And I realized, especially when I brought people into the business of raising capital and stewarding other people's money, you better have purpose, because most people are not going to be strong enough to sacrifice the way you have to sacrifice to serve other people if you're only doing it for the money. I feel most people don't achieve all they could achieve in life because once they get a little bit of breathing room, once they get a little bit of cushion, they wander off and come off task, off mission, because it never really was their mission, and they go actually do the things they want to do. When my children were coming into adulthood, I said, look around at your peers, and what you're going to see is they're going to be asked and they're going to seek an answer to a question. What can I do to make money? And then they're going to back that into a question. What do I need to learn so that I'm qualified to get a job doing what will make me money? And then they go to school and they figure out, they get that training, never even questioning whether they like it or not. In fact, a lot of times they don't. Then they graduate and they're like, what can I do to make money? Get a job. They go get a job. Now they're happy. They think. They get a little bit of credit. They get a little bit of income. They leverage that into a house, a car, maybe a spouse, some kids. And about 10, 15 years into that, realizing they still got another 25, 30 to go, it hits. This is it. This grind is my life. Right. And that's when they show up and look for people like you, look for people like me. It's like, help me escape. I'm in what Kiyosaki calls the rat race. So my counsel is that as a young person, if you're out there listening to this right now, don't ask yourself what you need to do or learn to make money. Ask yourself what you need to build. What do you need to build? How do you want to live as a human being? And that's both what you want out of the world and what you're willing to give to the world or want to do for the world. And then how can you get paid to live that life? It is a much harder question to answer, but you will love the answer when you find it. And it's well worth the effort. And so for me, this concept of identity becomes huge. And so I went through an identity crisis when I had my spiritual transformation, because who I was no longer who I was. And I began to identify with this new faith and this new doctrine and this new way of seeing myself. And that was the beginning. It was very generic. It was very scripted. It was very structured, but it was good. I mean, it was huge. And in the process, I began to realize that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, that I'm a unique human being. And as I began to really study creation and I began to study humanity, even the biology of being a human being, I go, you know what? Nobody has the exact same DNA as I have. Nobody has the same retina and the same fingerprint. All the human beings that have ever lived and all that will ever come, I am 100% unique, as are you and everybody listening to this. And I just was, wow. Can you imagine being a designer, having to create billions of things that are very similar, but yet completely different? And then you marry that to the set of experiences that we have in a lifetime. Now I'm really unique. And then it begs the question, why? Why am I unique? And if you look around to me, if you look around at all of the world and the universe, the way we understand it, and look at it, you have to start out your basic philosophy on a premise. And your premise has to be either everything I see is a complete random accident, that it all just came together, and the precision of the orbits and the way the ecosystem works and the water evaporates and the wind blows it over, drops it, and the seeds and the growth and the fruit and the food and the recycling and all the things that are part of the ecosystem just on planet Earth. Just on planet Earth. Forget what's going on throughout the universe, right? If you think all of that just happened randomly, that's a premise. And if that's your premise, you're going to go about life probably thinking, well, it doesn't matter what I do because there's no plan. I can do whatever I want. And you can imagine what the world would be if everybody lived that way.
And when you live that way, it's not necessarily very satisfying either. I mean, my experience of people who live that way, or even when I live that way, is there's actually not a sense of building purpose. There's not a sense of building self, and there's not a sense of building community.
Community is the word. There's not a sense of belonging. You don't belong to the creation.
You don't belong to anything. You don't belong to community. You don't belong to a pathway that you've defined. You're not building any mastery. Like, you're just kind of like flopping around. And then what is your value? What is your value, and what's the value of the people around you? Is very little. Go ahead.
That innate desire to belong, I believe, was put there by your creator.
I think it was too. I think that I call it the tribal instinct. I call it top and bottom. If it's true spiritually and it's true on our humanity biology, there's a reason why that exists. And that's a powerful connection. And that need to belong in our genes as a tribal being, as a herd being, as a pack being, is just as important for our good, for our mind, for our creation, for our community, for our sense of planet and purpose. Because that's what we need in order to have that fulfilled. We've got to reach all the way up. Sorry, you touched on something I riffed on. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. So I think all of that is just evidence that there's a creator. But you have to decide. I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm just telling you, you're going to have to decide. Either there is or there isn't. It's binary. I mean, it's pretty simple. And if there is, and you're not it, then by definition, you're a creature, meaning that the creator created you. And then if you think that any being capable of creating this amazing ecosystem, this amazing world, this amazing body, everything that we are, and orchestrating all of this, the idea that you're going to be able to comprehend that, I think, is a height of arrogance. So I don't really try to understand it. I just try to think through logically. If there's a creator and I'm not it, then I am a creature, and presumably I'm here for a purpose, or I wouldn't be here. And if I do have a purpose assigned to me by the creator, I'm probably equipped to do that purpose. And probably if I seek the purpose diligently, sincerely, the odds of me finding it are probably pretty good, because what's the point in keeping it a secret? And so then from that point forward, it's like, well, how do you go about seeking it? And I'm a big believer in the purpose form, the first P being premise. The next one is passion. Like, what do you really care about? And so I think we have some natural urges that put us into things that I think are normal for us to do. We get attracted to other people. We have a desire to recreate. We have a desire to be productive. Right? We have a desire to do that. Most people will take up a hobby. I mean, it's a natural desire. And so that's the beginning. But I think that desires are powerful. Passion can create motion. That's why I teach sales, and a big part of it is touching the heart and touching those emotional triggers. Manipulative people use them, against your common sense, but a professional will actually use them to uncover what it is you really want, and then work within the framework of what's in your best interest to help you get it. So those are principles, the principles of what you believe in, right? I can say, oh, I really want that car, but it belongs to somebody else. The only way to get the car is to steal it. Well, that would violate a principle. So I'm not going to do that, right? That passion to have the car might be valid. Just to throw an example out there, it could be another man's wife, whatever it is, right? But the principle I would have to violate to get it is going to channel that passion. And so anyway, there's a whole series of P's. And when you start moving based on passion and you're guided by principle, then you step into what I call providence. Doors will open, things you can't script. I could have never scripted meeting you. The circumstances led to that. That was written into my destiny, and yours, right? I can't script that. But I can recognize it when it happens. And then I can test it to see, is this something that interests me? Does it violate any of my principles? Is there some form of collaboration? We have people that we get along with, places where we feel we belong, other places we don't. And because we're all different, we don't all belong in the same places. We don't all belong with the same people. And so that there's that diversity that I think is replete throughout creation. Just looking at all the different creatures, it's like, wow, this is pretty diverse. All the different environments, pretty diverse.
I think diversity is required. Like, again, if you talk about a destiny, a creation, something that makes sense, diversity is required in that just as much as purpose and being on purpose and having the drive and the desire to be on purpose is required in that. But please, you were saying.
And inside of that, you need to be productive, because that's kind of the rules of nature, right? You don't produce, you don't eat, right? If I'm out on a desert island all by myself, if I don't hunt, fish, or harvest, I'm not going to eat. Nobody's going to come along and make me a sandwich, right? So I've got to figure it out, right? And you just extrapolate that basic fundamental principle of economics out across, societies. All of human societies are organized primarily around meeting human needs, and those are economic in nature. We have things that we need that we have to produce, and division of labor and markets and efficiencies. I mean, however sophisticated it is, it all comes back to that core premise or principle. And if you violate that core principle, then the fiber that holds the whole concept together begins to break down. And we're experiencing some of that. We have people who consume that don't produce. And we have too many people in that category. We have a lot of things that go on that aren't economically sound. Why? Because we have people in policy-making decisions, from the voting booth all the way up into the legislature and the judiciary and in the executive branch and throughout, the world, who either don't have an economic education or are willing to violate economic principles for their own benefit, even though there are other segments of society that are going to suffer the consequences. And so if you look back just at US history, some of the decisions that we've made in the last 125 years have gutted our middle class, have ruined the purchasing power of our dollar, have put us in a position of high debt, weakness. We've destroyed or attacked or undermined in many ways the nuclear family. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, the things that have happened socially as a consequence of bad economics. And the only way it's going to get fixed is not by empowering one monopoly over another monopoly, in my opinion.
Okay, good. Let's hear it. Main Street versus Wall Street. Let's do it.
Yeah, I think we are going through a global drive. I think a trend, call it, the fourth turning, whatever you want to call it, Great Reset, which is a Klaus Schwab thing. But I think that we're going through a time in human history where human beings are striving to decentralize. It explains the rise of Bitcoin, which is decentralized money. It explains the rise of gold, which is decentralizing the global financial system from the hegemony of the US dollar. It explains guys like Donald Trump, which are dismantling the monopoly of what they're calling the deep state. Nigel Farage and his rise in Britain, Brexit and that move. Even a guy like Bernie Sanders, as he was ascending, these guys were breaking up the monopolies. They were doing things differently. That socialist movement in the United States is a concept of or democratizing, trying to bring the government down to the people. The flaw, whether it's right or left in any system, is that if you say, oh, well, I'm anti-capitalist, therefore we need to take the monopoly power from the businesses and we need to give it to the government because the government represents the people. The problem is it's still a monopoly. Now, the people in the business side say, no, we need to get the government off our back. We need to empower capitalism, and then we need to empower big business. So we have big government, big business, big media, big tech, big pharma. What's a common word? Big. And it's big versus little. Wall Street is a consolidation of economic power into this central hub that dominates the world. The central bank, by definition, centralizes power over the currency, which is the lifeblood of economic activity. And because the Federal Reserve note is the world's reserve currency, that means that the Federal Reserve basically has centralized power over the currency of the entire world, right? That's too much power. The old adage that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the world sees it. And they may not completely understand it. It took me, I was on a panel, a future money panel in the New Orleans Investment Conference. I got Peter Schiff on my right-hand side, who hates Bitcoin, loves gold. And I got Lawrence Lepard on my left side. And beside him, James Lavish, and at the end of the table, Daniel DiMartino Booth, who is a supporter of the Fed, but thinks it needs to be reformed. Peter hates the Fed. I hate the Fed. I'm thinking Larry's probably in that same camp. But Larry and James have really come full speed with Bitcoin. And so the two of them are getting into it. And, then Adam Taggart, who is moderating the panel, asks us all, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm on this panel with these brilliant people. I mean, I don't even want to open my mouth. I'm afraid to have an opinion. But I thought, as I'm listening to this and I'm really thinking about what's going on in the world, I'm just a big believer in looking at the big macro trends. And, the fall of the dollar since the inception of the Federal Reserve is a macro trend. Real estate investing is all about leveraging the inevitable decline of the dollar, which the flip side of that is called inflation. And when you can buy a real asset called real estate and you pair it with another real asset called the productivity of a tenant who's going to give you 25% of their productivity or so to live in your property. Now, both of those things over time, because of the falling dollar, are going to inflate. You marry that to debt, which locks in your purchasing price, effectively giving you the ability to short the dollar. You're going to have a pretty good chance of outperforming inflation and building wealth in excess of inflation, tearing it down. And so these macro principles translate directly into Main Street strategy. Now, I married that later to the concept of gold, because gold, what I realized in 2008 is that gold actually went up when real estate was going down. Now that's, correlation isn't causation, but it was enough to kind of open my eyes a little bit. And I looked at that and I thought, well, you know what? Why is that? Why is that happening? What I realized is that real estate was driven by the mortgage market, and the mortgage market was driven by the bond market, and the bond market was in trouble. That was what the GFC was all about. It was a bond market crisis, not a real estate crisis. It wasn't even a mortgage-backed crisis or a mortgage crisis. It was a mortgage-backed securities crisis, which infected the bond market. Okay. And so when people can't go to bonds for safety, they have to go someplace else. They went to gold. So gold shot up. So I said, okay, now I understand that. That makes sense to me. So if I'm a real estate investor, I'm going to look for opportunities to move some of my real estate equity, which is largely fake, and I could do a whole thing on that, and move it into something more real that's insulated from the currency and insulated from the banking system, and that's gold. And then I can use debt to do that through a concept called arbitrage, where I take a loan and I make a loan at a spread. And then I can take a little bit of that free cash and park it in gold, which moves it away from the where I consider a riskier place to keep equity on your balance sheet, which would be real estate. And so that's how some of these, I don't want to sit here and have this big philosophical conversation. I want to bring it back down to Main Street, because when we talk about Wall Street versus Main Street, it's this move to decentralize. And so right now, I think new media, we're it. We've already won. We've already won. We have decentralized media. That's already happened. Legacy media is dying. They're in trouble. The gig economy, people, hey, I don't care enough to go back and work in a building and work in a hierarchy and be attached to one brand, single point failure, one paycheck. I'm really interested in working out of my home, starting a small business, and having a network of customers that I support. Maybe collectively we're a big enterprise.
Right. We're a segment in the market, therefore makes us a noticeable segment in the general stacking of markets, but we're not necessarily collectively in the same company.
Correct. Well, but so you're talking about joining Collective Inner Circle. I hope you do. And inside that, we have a man named Travis. And Travis happens to be an entrepreneur who owns a big fleet of delivery trucks that is contracted to Amazon. And so even though his trucks all say Amazon, and even though he delivers Amazon packages, the guy delivers more packages in the state of Wisconsin than UPS, FedEx, and the post office combined, right? But he doesn't work for Jeff Bezos. He's an entrepreneur. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of independent entrepreneurs that open up websites and offer their products and services and do their fulfillment through Amazon, but they're independent. So Amazon isn't a big company, it's a big network. And I think that's the concept of decentralization. And so I think colleges that are preparing you to get a job working in a singular corporation are not preparing you for what is now the real world. And now today with AI, a handful of people, 4 or 5 people, can do the work of a company of 30 or 40 people, or as an independent contractor, you can have relationships with 10 or 20 different clients. So that's decentralizing capitalism. It's decentralizing your job. And then right now what I see is our economy, which was largely industrialized through the 1800s. It was agrarian, and then it was industrial through the beginning of the 1900s. And then eventually it flipped over. Once we got the central bank in place in 1913, we took the gold away from the people so they couldn't have real money. In 1933, we basically took over the global financial system. The United States did in 1945 at Bretton Woods, and then eventually defaulted from the accountability of the gold standard in 1971. Just prior to that, we took all the people's silver with the 1965 Coinage Act. You have that whole system breaking down, the financial system and creating a lot of distortions and hyperinflation that turned our economy into a financialized economy. People made more money trading claims on productivity than actually being productive. Okay, and when that happens, your economy is going to systematically get weaker. Now, when you have a huge credit card, you can hide that weakness, right? If you have a good job, you have a nice home and a nice car, and you wear nice clothes, and your kids are involved in activities, and you lose your job, but you have a huge credit line, your neighbors can watch you live for 2, 3, 4 years, not knowing that your finances are imploding. I think the world has been looking at the United States exporting way more than it imports, running up record amounts of debt. And we've been living on credit for so long. And if we don't actually get back to being productive, the game is going to end. And I think Americans need to pay attention. Now, I do think that we are making an attempt to get back on track. We're working on eliminating waste. We're creating incentives to bring people over. Scott Bessent, Secretary Treasurer, said we're not an administration for Wall Street, we're an administration for Main Street. People were complaining when the stock market was going down because they said, oh, all the foreigners are selling the US. Well, they were selling US stocks, they were selling US bonds, which is causing interest rates to go up. But what they also are doing is making commitments to bring hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars of capital into the United States. Roche is going to produce pharmaceuticals here. Honda's bringing a factory back in. The United Arab Emirates has pledged like $1.4 trillion over 10 years, $140 billion a year. Taiwan Semiconductor bringing $100 billion into Arizona. That's Main Street. Those are factories that are going to open. Those are businesses that are going to start, jobs that are going to be created, and then secondary companies that will pop up to support those primary companies, and then tertiary companies like dry cleaners and restaurants and auto repair and doctors and all those people are going to pop up to support those secondary and primary. But you got to get that primary going. So we're making a concerted effort to do that. So even though I know we're going through this intense change, and change is scary, and even though I know it's very risky, the rules of the game are changing. And it means you need to evolve with them and kind of see where things are happening. But I think that on the one hand, people that have relied upon persistent, consistent inflation and financialization just to ride away, think I'm just going to buy this thing and wait and sell it to somebody else for twice as much later, right? Are going to start to realize, I better start to invest in productivity. I better invest for cash flow.
We've got to create something here that actually brings value through sweat equity and work noticeably versus just counting on inflation and this false movement of credit.
That's right. And the people that ride that decentralization wave and get involved in Main Street small business and the types of properties that are going to support this re-emergence of that middle class, I think have an opportunity to make a ton of money. And I'm very, very bullish. I'm very, very excited. At the same time, I need to hedge, because if it doesn't happen fast enough, the electorate who doesn't have the financial education and understand what's happening might get frustrated and say, no, we need to give it back to the monopoly. And they're going to raise taxes and redistribute wealth and make it fair, because they don't have the economic education to understand. And I'm not calling them stupid, but there's a lot of propaganda out there that history says that methodology has never worked and probably will never work, with one exception. And that one exception is if, in fact, AI and robotics 100% replaces human productivity, then the basic premise of capitalism, which is I'm going to be productive and change the fruit of my productivity, exchange it for the fruit of your productivity, then that game might change. And if we allow an economy to rise up where the people who own the robots get the profits the robots create, and human beings don't have a role to play in a productive economy because robots are doing everything, then it's going to be very difficult for that individual human being to move from the class of not owning the means of production. And then that old communist ideal actually might even make sense, because we're not, but I mean, we're not there yet, but at the rate things are changing, I mean, I could see in 10 years, 15 years, robots being just as, having as much dexterity as human beings, AI being as creative as human beings. And it could be a great era of human enlightenment and an opportunity to explore our purpose. I don't think our purpose will go away. We'll just be able to express ourselves differently, because we won't be constrained by having to be productive. Everything will be produced for us. But fundamental economic systems are going to be very, very different. So I'm watching for that too.
All right. At that amazing statement, I've got to close this out. So I know that I took your class, Win Funds and Influence People. It was an amazing class. I have every intention of bringing myself and my staff back to that, my quote unquote staff. I have a variety of people I do different businesses with, and I'm like, we need to have this conversation. So I really believe people should need to go to that. I know you're working on a book as well. I know you're also at times, if people are super kind, that you might offer them consulting work, access to your brilliance and to your knowledge. And how do people get a hold of you? How do people stay close to you so that they can see what it is that you're creating to get this amazing value that brain of yours clearly has?
I think the easiest thing, I just try to keep it super simple. If you just send an email to follow at Russell Gray, RussellGray, russellgray.com, then, every social media, every podcast appearance, every seminar, everything I'm involved in, I'll tell you about, I'll invite you to, and you can be a part of it. I'm getting ready to launch my new show, Main Street Capitalist. I put that off for quite a while because I've had some infrastructure things I wanted to get in place. And most importantly, I didn't want to just go talk about the same things I've talked about for the last 20 years. Because the world has really changed. As you can tell, I've spent a lot of time thinking about where we're headed and where, if I'm going to be a thought leader, and I try to be that by hanging around with other thought leaders and challenging what I see and getting other perspectives, then I want to make sure that I've really thought it through and that I'm bringing it back down to Main Street. I just don't want to wax on to sound smart, but I want to have somebody able to walk away and go, okay, I can actually do something with this.
I can implement that. And that's hugely important. And you've been able to do that in the work that I've seen you produce so far. It is an influencer's job, in my mind, to not just wax on pretty. That's really great. But to be able to make it implementable so you actually add value and change people's lives on the ground. And so I immensely support that thought. And I look forward to your podcast. This is Christina Suter with Real Estate Breakthrough. Thank you so much, Russell Gray. Love having you on. You will see more in 2 weeks. iTunes, Spotify, and Amazon TV, YouTube, and Roku TV are all places you can find me, or ChristinaSuter.com.